First, let me say thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor to be back with you. I appreciate everything you are contributing to resiliency, well-being, functional maximization, biohacking, and all the other ways we say what resiliency is. Back in the last millennium, there was something called health promotion. Way back in the time of my grandmother and your grandmother, there was something called home remedies. In all these cases, we're just talking about resilience. So resilience is the new buzzword. There's another one called whole health. When we go into the discussion of, well, what do these things mean? What are the parameters? What's the definition? They all have the same meaning. Interestingly enough, way back in Asia, speaking of Qigong and Tai Chi, there is what is called Yang Sheng, meaning wellness, health promotion, functional maximization. In India, there's something called Ayurveda. We're talking about resilience, but in fact, we're talking about all of these things because they're all the same thing. And because we're into the Qigong and Tai Chi realm right now, let's reflect on the original idea of resilience in the shamanic Chinese tribes. Yang Sheng does not mean diagnosing and treating diseases. It does not mean figuring out how things are not working and trying to get them to work again. Yang Sheng and resiliency is about developing ourselves and becoming conscious. It would mean nourishment. It would mean hydration. It would mean sleep. It would mean meditation. It would mean exposure to nature. It would mean exercise. It would mean right relationships. When I say the word right relationships, I'm thinking about Buddhism and the Eightfold Path, which brings me to the topic of resiliency, which is the whole concept of stream entering. I'm sure you're familiar with this, so we can talk about that in a few moments. All of these areas, nourishment, exposure to fresh air, getting into nature, hydration, rest, exercise, meditation. And of course, in China, exercise goes all the way from Kung Fu and gymnastics, sitting still and reflecting. That is a lot of territory. Call that resiliency, call that wellness, call that Yang Sheng. What do you think?
I love it. And to add to the Chinese side of things, let's not forget the ancient Greeks, who more or less at the same time were also working on their understanding of medicine. Hippocrates purportedly had two daughters, one named Hygiene, and the other one was Panacea. Hygiene is essentially prevention and can include mental hygiene, inner strength, resilience, all of that, not only mental, but embodied resilience. And I think that's something that exists worldwide. It just simply goes by different names.
That is so cool. Let's stay on that for just a moment. The daughters of Hippocrates, Panacea, which is the cure of everything, and Hygeia, which is the prevention of requiring a cure. I think they're actually the daughters of Asclepios, the god of healing that
Ah,
is mythological, while Hippocrates is supposedly a historic figure. But the key point that you're talking about here, when we take it to Chinese medicine, and I'm thrilled that you're drawing the equivalency because we're back into the same thing. When we say resiliency, we mean well-being and functional maximization. When we talk about Greek medicine, we're talking about panacea, which is to have one cure for everything, or prevention, hygeia, which is to not need a cure. In Chinese medicine, there's two kinds of medicine: diagnose and treat health problems, and a second kind of medicine, which is called maximize the righteous. Maximizing the righteous means to facilitate, nourish, and enhance everything. There are cases of genetic derangement. We live in an atmosphere where pharmaceuticals are creating genetic derangement, but encouraging the people who are listening to believe in the fact that there's something inherent in our being which is disease preventive and actually super creative. When we tap it and when we nourish it, it's there for us as a resource to call upon when we want to be an artist, teacher, physicist, accountant, or anything we haven't become yet. How are we going to do that? By calling upon our natural vitality and maybe get some training. This all goes back to the idea of what would happen if our nations, our cultures, actually had resilience as a foundational feature of school and college, family life, and community life, maximizing that which is inherent, removing obstruction from our natural heritage of vitality. That's what we're talking about here. And it's so exciting.
It is a great topic to explore. One of the things that I want to bring up is that vitality is a more generic term. We were also talking about prevention of diseases, which probably is more domain of preventative medicine or perhaps boosting immunity or optimizing immunity. There's also mental resilience dealing with stressors or resilience to environmental impacts, whether it's pollution or information overload, thanks to the internet, or wars and other disasters that befall nations and countries. Indigenous people experience all types of onslaught on their way of life and oppression in many cases. They have to exercise resilience with each step they take on Earth. In other words, we are looking at resilience as a global phenomenon of maximizing one's ability to function as an efficient and productive human being. So we experience less strife, suffering, and disease on one hand, but also we maximize our potential on the other hand, which is what we're interested in, isn't it?
I have a lot of exposure to the indigenous communities in North America. One of the things that we see as evidence of the collapse of cultural traditions of resiliency is the utilization of alcohol and drugs. It's the same with people who work in corporations, and it's the same with people who are under the duress of the invasion of their nation by some other nation. We tend to turn to things like alcohol and drugs to manage our emotions. And what resilience would do is invite us proactively, whenever possible, to build our defensive chi and our inherent self-regulatory chi so that extreme circumstances don't cause collapse into anxiety and depression. Earlier, I mentioned a paradigm that had to do with the Buddhist methodology. Whenever we talk about any one part of this whole idea, we're only talking about it in terms of one particular culture's approach, but we've acknowledged that every culture has the same thing. So we're using Buddhist philosophy as a model for how to accomplish resiliency. In that context, an individual has an insight that says, I think I'm overreacting, and I want to investigate how to be less reactive. The first level of this whole process towards peace, no matter what, is going from being what's called a worldling, meaning a person who's just buffeted about by space-time, who has no awareness of the transcendental aspects of being, and has not been able to grasp the value of having a relationship with some aspect of themselves that we could call spirit or soul. They're in survival mode. From a worldling to a stream enterer, meaning entering the stream of wisdom. Native Americans have stream of wisdom. Vikings, stream of wisdom. Siberian shamans, stream of wisdom. African shamans, stream of wisdom. This whole idea of entering into the stream of wisdom is a thing. The key here is that once we realize there's something beyond just cause and effect and the complexity of living within the limits of space-time, we start to ask the question, why am I so frustrated and what can I do about it? Is there a way to cultivate aspects of myself which allow me to become more self-aware? In the realm of wellness and resiliency, we could talk about what's called interoception. Not only am I angry, but I'm aware of the fact that I'm angry, and I'm exploring the reasons why I think I might be angry and investigating how to be less reactive. That's one of the first things that happens in the Buddhist tradition of going towards enlightenment. We realize that we're reactive because of our conditioning, and it becomes reasonable to investigate the possibility of being less reactive, turning to bodies of wisdom, whether it's Ayurvedic, Taoist, Buddhist, North American shamanic, or South American shamanic. It's always the same thing, talked about in different ways. The stream enterer is a person who's basically saying to themselves, do I really need to be this freaked out? If there was a bomb going off next to me, yes. But if there are bombs going off in other countries and I'm panicking about it, or if somebody got elected that I don't like, and I'm now disabled physically and mentally, then how resilient is that? It really comes down to one very powerful idea: being able to discriminate between what I can control from what I can't control. The things that I can't control, I'm going to cultivate the capacity to understand that it's not worth it for me to spend my resources trying to figure that out. But I can control, I'm going to spend my resources to figure that out. And I'm going to use rest, hydration, nourishment, exercise, positive relationships to manage that.
Wow, that was an amazing discourse on resilience. There's a deep reason why we're talking about entering the stream, and I love it that you brought it up. Rather the word stream, I usually use the word flow, because then we also talk about the flow states. We also talk about embodying being in a flow. And some people say when you're going with the flow, you're just reactive, going wherever the wind blows or wherever the flow goes. And maybe it's not where you want to go. Well, is this the stream that takes us to where we want to go? The promise of the journey to enlightenment sounds really enticing, at least to some of us. But what I came to realization some while ago is that we are not on a journey to enlightenment. We are on a journey of enlightenment. We can actually experience enlightening moments on a daily basis. We can get enlightened about certain things in our lives. We can get enlightened about how we react to things and instead learn how to respond. We get enlightened in terms of entering nirvana, the state of freedom from suffering. And that's one of the key principles that I teach in the context of working with resilience, that even if shit hits the fan, it's an invitation to figure out what you can do and roll with the punches regarding those things that you cannot change. The question is this going to take you where you want to go? That's when we also learn to navigate the flow, like the boat. Putting the sail up doesn't necessarily always go where the wind blows. It can tack against the wind or go at whatever angle the captain chooses. It uses the power of the wind, it uses the flow, but it still gets where it needs to get. That gives us the invitation to learn how to navigate the flow by tapping into additional resources. Exactly the resources that you were talking about in terms of hydration, better rest, better nutrition, and all the other lifestyle changes. We can learn how to tap into additional resources within ourselves in terms of different energy resources and discover there is a lot more to us than what meets the eye and what we know about ourselves. The tip of the iceberg is a good example of what we know about ourselves compared to what we don't know about ourselves. How can we connect with those resources and that part of the iceberg that we don't know about? Well, we need to get to know it. And that's exactly what challenges provide us. Resilience gives us an opportunity to experience challenges and not run away from them and not get dissociated or have PTSD as a result of challenges. And even if you do have a PTSD, you can heal that too if you're resilient. I healed mine. But the idea is to create the ability to experience challenges and see how this rocks the boat or rocks the iceberg, exposing a different side of the iceberg to the light of consciousness, learning what's on this side of me. Let's see if the challenge is going to rock me the other way. There's a different side to me I didn't know about. Challenges provide us an ability to discover new things about ourselves that we didn't know we had, and then tap into the resources associated with those altered states or different ways of being that previously were not available to us or we just did not identify.
How cool is that?
It's cool.
One thing to add back to you for any next question you want to bring up is we said enlightenment, and then we said of enlightenment. There's one more way to say this, and that is to realize that I am already enlightened. So instead of going towards it or being in a process that's revealing it, to actually understand that we are inherently enlightened and that it's a process of uncovering our natural state. One of my favorite things from Chinese is the concept of immortality. To some extent, immortality in the Chinese view is kind of parallel to nirvana in the Buddhist view. There's a phrase from the Taoist Qigong tradition that says, uncovering the aspect of myself which is eternally well, cannot get sick, and does not die.
That's really contradictory when it compares to the Buddhist thought, where the idea of impermanence is one of the key principles of Buddhism. There is nothing that lasts forever. We can dive as deep as the rabbit hole goes. For example, we can go into the Bardo yoga and exploration of the states in between different states of being or various modes of existence. Resilience is something that you really want to have when you go into the Bardo states or exploring in between states. When we develop that level of clear-headedness and presence of mind, or lucidity, as in being lucid in the dream and realizing, I'm dreaming right now. That makes the whole experience in the dream a lot less likely to push your buttons, or at least you won't take it as personally. You may even realize I'm dreaming it up. There must be a reason why I'm dreaming it up. So let's see what I can learn from this dream experience instead of struggling against it or trying to run away or pretend it's not happening. That's a really high level of resilience when we thrive as a result of the challenges that we get, rather than feeling like I don't care, I'm thick-skinned, so whatever you throw at me is not going to hurt me. That's a low stage of resilience. But
Yeah,
we go through developmental stages, and eventually we discover that we'll live our lives problems free because everything that we experience is not really a problem, it's a learning opportunity.
amen. When we go to the whole idea of the dream, I think we're getting a little further down the rabbit hole than resilience. But if we get deep enough into the wisdom stream, a reasonable question to ask, when I think I'm awake, am I really dreaming? It's Monday morning, I get up, have some coffee, I go to my job, I think that I'm awake in a world. However, the wisdom traditions would tell you that there's nothing other than dreaming.
Indeed. And how often do I experience waking up in a dream and getting up with my dad to realize sooner or later I'm dreaming? How do I realize? That's a different story? There's a whole art of dream yoga that I teach and practice. Even if we don't go as deep, we still discover that's what it takes to be the thought leader, even in the resilience industry. You have to dig deeper to discover what it really means and how can people not just benefit from being resilient so that they are more productive at work and don't get burned out as easily, but how do they actually experience their lives higher level of quality, higher level of consciousness, and higher level of human evolution? That's where I'm going.
Yeah, me too. I like the idea of thought leader and influencer because we can read from the script and lead people in exercises that help familiarize them with living in a less stressed context. There's books and videos and courses on that. But then to actually be a thought leader, someone who wrote that book because they lived into it. And of course, what we're doing in our work with other people is that we're supporting people in living into authentic thought leadership and authentic influencership. There are millions of people who are suffering, and there's only a few of us who have actually unpacked this to the extent that we can help people to suffer less. And it's even a smaller number of people who can be, shall we say, three jewels. Now let's talk about three jewels. The first jewel is the model. In the Buddhist tradition, the model is Buddha. In the Taoist tradition, the model is Lao Tzu. In the Christian tradition, the model is Jesus. Let's take the three jewels and think about it in Buddhist terms, but then associate it with every tradition and even the current human tradition that you and I are aspiring to be a part of how the world is a better place. So you have the model, which is being absolutely, unmovably peaceful. That's the model. How you get there, Buddhism, Taoism, shamanism, whatever it is. That's the body of knowledge and practice. In Buddhism, call that the Dharma. One of the things that's the most important about the three jewels and the power of these ideas is the third jewel, the community of practitioners who share values called Sangha. So we have Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, or you could say we have the model, the knowledge base and practice, and the community of shared values. What you're doing and what I'm doing is building communities of people who are living into these three jewels. I'm looking forward to meeting everyone. Thank you so much for the alliance that we have been cultivating over these years. It's really inspiring for me learning how to be a cultivated person whether it's resiliency, wellness, or enlightenment.
One of those is our friend Bill Douglas, who founded the World Tai Chi and Qigong Day. We are wrapping World Tai Chi and Qigong Summit into a bigger umbrella organization of World Resilience Summit with world-class experts and thought leaders in resilience, Tai Chi and Qigong and related disciplines. I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much, Roger. It's been such a pleasure to see you today.
What a pleasure.